Hi, my name is Mike, and I'm here to read a comic. Today's comic is Peter Parker, The Spectacular Spider-Man, issue number 74, dated January 1983. And kind of an interesting cover here. What we're told is that this is the conclusion of the Deborah Whitman Saga. One of the things I had promised myself is that I was going to look at more 80s comics, and I decided to do it in kind of a theme way where I'm going to examine the women in Peter Parker's life. I'm going to kind of do it randomly here, so I'm going to be discussing, obviously Debbie Whitman, Gwen Stacy, Mary Jane Watson, the Black Cat, Felicia Harding, and a few other of the loves of Peter Parker when I was reading the comic. I remember very few issues with Deborah Whitman. I never really quite understood where she stood because she always seemed kind of like this sad, mopey character. And I wasn't really quite sure whether she had the crush on Peter or Peter had the crush on her, or whether they were romantic or not. And anything I know about her character, I pretty much know through osmosis, mostly from this issue and a few of the fragments that I can remember. And she seemed okay. I wasn't really bothered by her. It was kind of a strange relationship for Peter to be in that Whitman had a lot of adult issues. So it kind of wasn't with Mary Jane Watson where they would mostly flake out, or Gwen Stacy, and they were mostly concerned about what clothing they were wearing or whether they were prepared for Professor Warren's next test or something like that, or what disco they're gonna him and Mary Jane Watson gonna go to. Deborah Whitman kind of had some real issues here that would be kind of unusual for Peter to deal with. So Deborah had a lot of baggage for one of the loves. I guess the other one would be Betty Brant, because she had some baggage based on her brother and her being a little bit older than Peter at the time. So anyway, I'm going to look at the issue, and it's called Fantasia. We'll take a look at the creative team. The writer is Bill Mantlo. Bill Mantlo is a well-known name to Bronze Age readers or Bronze Age kids, simply because Bill put out so much material. He was basically Marvel's filling guy. So they were usually very general stories. They were stories that honestly were not very memorable. Now, Bill was not a hack, but he did produce a lot of hack work. But when he was given a title to work on consistently, he was definitely a much better writer that way. And Bill Mantlo is actually someone that I met when I was a kid. When I was 9 years old, I was playing in the park, and I had become friendly with this other kid who was also playing. And it turned out that he was the stepson of Bill Mantlo. And he had told me that, listen, hey, my dad, he writes for Marvel, and my mom works for Marvel too, because Karen Mantlo was a longtime letterer for Marvel. So I got a chance to go up to their apartment, and both Bill and Karen were there, and they were so gracious. I remember Bill being kind of thin and tall, but I was 9 at the time, so most adults looked tall to me. And I have to say, at the time, Bill Mantlo had the most amazing comic collection I had ever seen at that time. He had all these early issues of Marvel. I remember Avengers 2 was one of them. They were in pristine condition. He didn't have any plastic bags, so the comics were just stacked on a shelf. I remember I was not allowed to touch them, and Bill was 100% right. It killed me when I saw all those comic books I wanted to read, and I couldn't even touch the covers. And I remember seeing Karen a couple of times because I'd gone to their apartment a few times. I remember seeing Karen working, and I think what they had done is they took their own bed and they put it in the living room. And basically the bedroom, because it was a 2-room apartment from what I remember, was basically Karen's studio, because Bill could just write on a piece of paper, but Karen actually did the lettering at home on this huge draft board. I remember she didn't like people overlooking her shoulder when she was working. So when she saw me there, she immediately kicked me out of the room. Sadly, Bill's story is a bit troubling toward the end. I'll kind of talk about that. I had long been out of his life at that point. He did gift me a page of original artwork. It was from one of his worst stories, so he probably was thrilled to get rid of it. It was a Marvel 2-in-1 with the Thing and the Golem. And I was like 9-10 years old. I didn't appreciate what I was given. I think I ended up destroying it like a week later. So anyway, that's part of my Bill Mantlo story. We see the art is by Bob Hall. Not impressed. I'm sorry to say, but I was not impressed with Bob's work. Jim Mooney did the inks. Jim Mooney was a longtime Spider-Man artist. He had kind of an interesting career arc in that he was let go by DC because DC thought he was too old-fashioned. So then he got hired by the hip Marvel company. He updates his style, and he turned out to be a really good contributor to a lot of pretty good Spider-Mans in the 1970s. So Jim, when he got his walking papers from DC, he realized, hey, I need to update my style, and he was one of the guys who did so. A lot of guys couldn't do that. Sal Buscema did that. If you look at his style from the 70s and you compare it to what he was doing in the 1990s, he was another guy who changed his style. And you really got to admire guys like that because it's a difficult thing to do, but they found it in them. Tom DeFalco was the editor, and Jim Shooter was I guess, I don't know, he was imprinting his philosophy on his work philosophy on the staff at this point. So we see an imagined image here because the title kind of gives it away. Fantasia. We see a mostly closed Spider-Man here. He doesn't have his mask on. He's beating up on some common criminals, and we see caught in this kind of web of drama is Debbie Whitman. She doesn't want Peter to come any closer than he is right now. So obviously Debbie's having some type of mental episode here, because at this point the two were close, Peter Parker and Deb Whitman. From what I understand, Deb accidentally found out that Peter is Spider-Man, and that apparently has kind of like hurt her fragile psyche. And it turns out that Deb is actually recalling this dream to a psychiatrist here. And we see kind of film noir imagery here. So there's a lot of use of shadow here. So the style of this particular page, this was kind of well thought out. I don't necessarily think it was that well executed, because I was not really impressed with Bob Hall's work, but I am impressed with the thought process here. They were definitely going for that shadowy film noir look. So anyway, Deb is explaining to the psychiatrist, listen, I found out that my boyfriend, Peter Parker, is Spider-Man. And I bet you in a world of superheroes, there are a lot of professionals who have probably heard stories like this too. And he's playing it off as something that's a figment of her imagination. That listen, your boyfriend isn't Peter Parker. The numbers don't add up. There's only one possibility, and that couldn't be the possibility. So it must be something that you're kind of confused about. And Debbie leaves the psychiatrist's office. She's not particularly happy with the session, but she does feel like some work came through. It makes her feel better. The psychiatrist does something that would not make Debbie feel better. And it looks like he's betraying her confidence, as he's asking Peter Parker if he had heard everything during that session. So there's a lot of ethical issues there. Apparently the psychiatrist and Peter Parker, they've been in contact again. If this guy is Debbie's patient, he's not supposed to be doing these type of end arounds, but this was 1983. Peter says he's stunned by this, and however, Peter is stunned for reasons that would contradict what the psychiatrist would think, because he feels bad that he's the one who may have pushed Debbie into sort of this journey to crazy land. We see Peter here. Peter has aged really badly here. Peter, he does not look. To me, Peter Parker was always the character in John Romita Drew or Ross Andrew Drew. This is an old Peter Parker here. So anyway, so Peter's trying to sort things out. He's still asking the psychiatrist for advice. The psychiatrist who snitched out his own patient. And what this guy comes up with is basically kind of a snake pit approach. Early psychological methods in human history, not particularly good. And one of them was the snake pit method. And this was something that people noticed that when people were put in extreme danger very quickly, they would often go crazy. Like, what if you fell into a snake pit? And the even if you were rescued from it, the trauma of that is so damaging that it causes irreversible trauma. And the idea was, well, if the snake pit caused it, we can do the reverse, and that will fix it. So what they would do is they would take the crazy person, put them in the same danger that made them crazy, expecting them to come out okay. And as we know, human psychology does not work that way, or animal psychology, I should say. So anyway, this guy wants to shock Debbie. And what he thinks it would be shocking is if Peter put on a Spider-Man costume. So the psychiatrist basically has this Halloween costume of Spider-Man. And he's saying, listen, you put this on, you confront her, you take the mask off, and she is going to laugh her ass off so hard that she'll forget all this nonsense that you're Spider-Man, and that will cure her. Peter Parker correctly calls this psychiatrist a quack, saying that this is not a soap opera, and this is the type of stuff you would see in a soap opera. And here Peter Parker's leaving, saying, listen, real people have real problems, not like those in the comic books. And we're not going to use a comic book situation here. We're not going to treat it as a comic book situation here. And that Deb needs help, and I'm going to help her. And he'll do it his way. Peter Parker is changing into Spider-Man. He's disappointed with the psychiatrist, feeling that he's not really helping Debbie right now. And he's going to swing around. He's going to kind of think about what's going on with his life. Turns out that Peter does have some deep feelings for her. However, he's worried about the owl and the Dr. Octopus. Because apparently these two guys are kind of like slugging it out for control of New York's crime underworld. So he's worried about that. He's also worried about getting money, because apparently Aunt May needs some money. Aunt May, I think, was put into a nursing home, but the thing was, for some reason they wanted to bring her back to her house, and they need to set up the proper medical care for her there. So that's why Peter needs the extra money. He's also worried about his finals. And Peter's worried about what the psychiatrist had recommended. Basically, that would be like playing games with Debbie, and that's something he doesn't want to do. And he doesn't want someone who's as close to her as him being the one playing the game. So Peter's actually being the more competent psychiatrist. We see Spider-Man. He's still lost in his thoughts. He's bouncing around town. And we see a shadowy figure, and spoilers, it's the Black Cat. But we're not given that information just yet. So anyway, Peter arrives on campus. Apparently, the Empire University has an Oppenheimer Atomic Research Lab. So it's kind of like more than a few years before his big movie would come out. And it looks like there's some action going on at the research lab. Turns out there's a helicopter on the roof, and it looks like more than a few men are going through the skylight here. Spider-Man's he's looking over the scene from above. So right now these guys think they're breaking in and not being observed. The first group, the group coming down, they're from the Octopus gang. So they're Dr. Octopus's men. And the ones who are already in the lab, they're the Owl's men. So it's the Owl gang. So once again, the Owl and Dr. Octopus are kind of going at it for control of the underworld. Spider-Man is looking in because it's kind of difficult here because there's no side to root for. And however, Spider-Man wants to stop this battle simply because he's worried about other people getting hurt. So he doesn't really care about these guys shooting it out, but he's concerned about maybe a stray bullet hurting someone. So he realized he has to stop these guys. He immediately goes after whoever he can grab. It doesn't matter whether it's an octopus guy or an owl guy. Spider-Man, he's handling these guys kind of easy. These are kind of just well-trained gunmen. They're not up to fighting a superhero. And Spider-Man, he's just kind of taking his time, being very leisurely about handling these guys. These guys are no threat to Spider-Man. And it turns out the guy who is a threat to Spider-Man, he's at the skylight. Spider-Man's senses go off. However, the individual flies past him so quickly that he can react in time, but he just barely saves himself. And he sees that it's the Owl. And the Owl is kind of a shadowy crime lord who's mostly a villain of Daredevil, but nevertheless, because he's the type of guy who fights it out with Kingpin in terms of who's the boss of bosses. So he's someone who doesn't normally end up on anyone's radar other than kind of Spider-Man or Daredevil, because those are the type of foes that they fight. However, we see the Owl. He is leaving with a device. He's obviously very well spoken. here. So this is a smart guy who went into crime. Spider-Man recognizes the owl. So the owl isn't like a B player to Spider-Man. He's saying, "Listen, I know who you are. I know you mostly fight Daredevil. He's told me you're a top guy. I never hear your name that often spoken about in most of my circles, and I handle crime in Manhattan. But hey, you know what? I'll take your word that you're a tough guy." So Spider-Man does have some grudging respect for the owl, and he's really none too smarter after this encounter, because he doesn't understand how anything in this type of lab would be of help to the owl. But the cops come. They're taking care of the gang members. So Spider-Man is taking his leave. He's still concerned about this gang war because, again, he knows New York is going to be the battlefield for it. And he knows that these two have a lot of resources that they can draw on and cause a lot of problems. Peter Parker, he goes back to the campus, and he's speaking to one of his professors. And the professor is admonishing Peter because he's been missing a lot of classes. He hasn't done well in his exams. He looks like he's going to be left back again. He's always the smartest guy in his grade because he keeps going down a grade. But Peter isn't concerned about his grades. He's concerned about Deb Whitman and what's going on with her. And apparently the professor is quite close to her. I'm not sure what type of relationship. I think it's I'm not sure what relationship she has with this professor, but obviously the professor knows a lot about Debbie, and he's kind of cluing Peter in that she does have some emotional problems and some baggage. However, she does have a friend, and he identifies this guy as the boyfriend. I don't know if he is the boyfriend. Biff Rifkin. He's saying, "Listen, why don't you talk to that lunkhead?" And Peter thanks I called him a professor. It looks like he's a doctor. And again, the professor's not thinking much of the situation, saying, "Listen, I appreciate you looking out for Deb, but maybe you should look out for yourself, based on these grades that you've been giving me, or these tests you've been giving me." So Spider-Man's thinking about Biff because he's going to talk to her and see what he can find out about Deb. He doesn't have a high opinion of Biff, and saying that he's obviously encountered this guy before. He kind of feels like he's just kind of like a stupid muscle man. And he honestly doesn't think that this guy is going to provide anything of useful information. So we see Dr. Octopus has shown up, and he's talking to the Kingpin. And I think these two kind of have met before. I'm not really sure. Dr. Octopus is kind of a strange villain in that he either has very high ambitions or he has very, very modest ones. I remember there were some arcs where he was basically, "Listen, I'm going to take over the world," and so forth. And in other issues, he's basically, he's fighting the Kingpin over 2 or 3 blocks of, gang turf. So Dr. Octopus, his ambitions kind of go back and forth. I mean, does he want to be a world conqueror or does he want to be a street boss? And anyway, it seems like Dr. Octopus is kind of doing both here. He feels that, if I take control of the New York criminal underworld, this will help me with my greater ambitions. And Kingpin, obviously he feels he's the Lord of Crime in New York. He doesn't like this talk of war, particularly with two individuals who kind of do have superpowers here. And Dr. Octopus is sort of making his case to the Kingpin that it would be better for you if you work with me than against me. And we see Dr. Octopus, he's demonstrating the power of his arms. And what he does is that he pulls a picture off the wall, which is not that impressive, but it turns out there's a wall safe behind it. And Octopus is able to yank the safe behind the picture, I should say. And then Dr. Octopus is able to take out a device from the wall safe, and then he smashes the window, leaving. This is pretty cool imagery here. Dr. Octopus feels that he made a fool of the Kingpin, and that he got what he needed, and he doesn't have to continue with this discussion. And Dr. Octopus, he's just on the rooftops, just crowing about his victory here, saying this is really easy. Kingpin's laughing at Dr. Octopus because basically what happened is that the device that Dr. Octopus took was a decoy one, and that he actually is holding the real one, and he's kind of petting it. But then the next panel we see the lights go off, and we hear someone telling the Kingpin, "I'll take that, Tubby." And the device that the Kingpin had is gone, and he's just left to wonder, what happened, because all he heard was that, one sentence from a female voice. And this is obviously the Black Cat. This was a nice little sequence here. I just wish it were better drawn. So anyway, we go and we see Spider-Man, and he's looking for Biff. And it turns out Biff is working at a health spa here. So the muscle-bound guy has a job making other people muscle-bound. Peter obviously knows him, so the two start talking. They're not close friends; they're more acquaintances, from what I understand. And it turns out that Peter does have something to apologize for. Oh, apparently the two got into a fight, and Peter punched Biff. Obviously, that would be very dangerous, not for Peter, but for Biff. But clearly, whenever he would hit Flash Thompson, he would always hold back, and he did so with Biff. However, Biff is aware that Peter tells Biff that he's there because he wants to talk about Debbie and helping her out. And then it turns out that Debbie actually has quite a few problems here that Biff is aware of. And he makes a good observation, and it's not one just about Deb, but just about all of Peter Parker's girlfriends. Saying that chick's nuts about you, and all you've ever done is hurt her. And looking at Peter Parker's history as a boyfriend, he's not a very good boyfriend for the most part, at least not during the years that I've read him, because he was always hurting his girlfriends. Obviously it was to maintain the secret identity, but nevertheless it was a traumatic relationship for most of those women. So it turns out that Peter's hearing that Debbie is married, and Biff is saying, yeah, she was married, but she separated from the guy. And they're basically Biff is retelling the story about Debbie's relationship with her first husband. And it turns out that Debbie has a history of falling for men who treat her badly. So this is a woman who kind of seeks out bad relationships, which is something that does occur. I'm not really quite sure why, though. I forgot the reasons. mainly because I'm not a woman looking for a bad relationship with a man. So anyway, Biff is telling her that eventually she married a guy on campus who was a big shot on the campus, and that he was basically treating Debbie pretty badly. And Biff had noticed Debbie had a black eye, saying, what's going on? I haven't seen you for a while. When I've seen you, you've been kind of quiet and out of it. And now Biff is looking at her with a black eye, and he's saying, listen, what's going on there? But Debbie didn't want to address the issue, so she just ran off crying. Biff was concerned, so he says that he stopped by their apartment. This is not an apartment. This is a two-story home. But so there was sort of a miscommunication there. And anyway, Biff hears Debbie's screams, and he hears the commotion from the street. So he breaks down the door, and he sees, her husband just is beating Debbie right here. And the husband's angry. The husband kind of looks like that character from the romance comics, Johnny Love. So yeah, I'm trying to think who else he kind of looks like, because he has the goatee. I can't think of any actor. So anyway, we see Debbie. She's on the ground. She's obviously hurt here. This guy's really doing a job on her, and Biff knocks him out with a punch. Biff says, "Yeah, I may have broken the law, but I still had to do what's right." Biff carries Debbie out of the home. The husband is knocked unconscious. We see Debbie has been hospitalized. Apparently, her injuries were pretty bad. Also, her injuries are going to be pretty bad based on the way Biff is carrying her here. Same way, Debbie, it looks like she has a broken right arm. She's talking to Biff, and basically Debbie is showing battered wife syndrome here by saying that, hey, he's really a good guy, deep in heart. Like when he belts me, he does it with a little love, and he always says he's sorry afterwards. And Biff is like saying, no, you're just basically rationalizing and making excuses, and you're enabling this situation. But the thing was, Biff pointed out that Debbie just simply wouldn't listen. She always went back. And Biff is trying to make a point here. He's also throwing a little shade at Peter here, saying that, yeah, Debbie doesn't look like someone who would be going through, battered spouse syndrome, but you can't judge a book by its cover. And Biff is pointing out, listen, you thought of me as this kind of brainless, stupid, muscle-bound brute. And, this little talk down should teach you that I'm not like that at all. Because Biff has actually been making very observant and empathetic points. Something that, say, Flash Thompson would have problems with. So he's being very insightful and reflective and honest. And he kind of throws a little shade saying, listen, I know you thought I was a dumbass, but I hope this shames you into thinking I'm not. And the scene might have worked better if the art were a bit better, I have to be honest. But nevertheless, it looks like Peter does contemplate what he says just a little bit. And he leaves. But he thinks he has an idea on how to help Debbie in terms of a therapy, and he's thinking shock therapy. And he's saying, listen, maybe I can do some good here, and you won't think I'm some stuck-up jerk who just looks down on you. So then we see Spider-Man. He has an idea about how to help Debbie. He's swinging, and then we see a warehouse. It looks like an empty warehouse, and we see from the silhouette that it's Dr. Octopus. And he's calling out for the owl. So I guess the two of them decided that there was going to be a meeting here. And basically what's going on with these two is that there's this particular device that both of them want. And it comes in two components. And the thing is, the owl has one component, and Dr. Octopus has the other component. And that was the component that he took from the Kingpin, or what he thought was the component that he wanted. He took that from the Kingpin. So they're going to have a meeting here to kind of discuss what's going on. Because the thing is, the device is useless unless the two pieces are together. So the owl having one piece doesn't really help him because he needs the other piece that Dr. Octopus has, and vice versa. So then it looks like, from what I understand from the dialogue, it looks like the owl wants to talk things out. He was willing to negotiate. But it was Dr. Octopus who was not willing to negotiate. So the owl went there with the purpose of, okay, we'll try to hammer out a deal. Whereas Dr. Octopus was, I'm going to be leaving with what I want, whether I have to murk this guy or not. So the owl has figured this out. He goes on the offense against Dr. Octopus. This guy isn't scared. So he's faced down heroes before. He's faced down villains before. And he takes advantage of his powers of flight to kind of knock Dr. Octopus off his feet. Then the owl grabs the device that Dr. Octopus had. Now he's saying, listen, now I got the two components, and I can fly, and I'm going to be leaving you. However, Dr. Octopus, he recovers, and he recovers enough for his tentacles to reach out and to grab the owl. So the owl was flying off, but he wasn't flying off fast enough. And the owl's noting that he dropped the piece that he had snatched from Dr. Octopus. And he's fearful, obviously, that's going to cause damage to the piece. I think, however, I might be missing a page. I think, however, it turned... Oh, no. Dr. Octopus, because it's so badly drawn, Dr. Octopus grabs the component back. So now the component is out of the owl's hand, and it's into Doc Ock's hand, or tentacles. This is not really a well-drawn comic here. Although this one panel of the owl looks really nice here. There's a lot of good emotions. This panel was well-drawn, unlike most of the rest of the book. So anyway, Dr. Octopus, he feels that now he has the component back, and he's just kind of walking off, and he's letting it be known that, the war is going to continue. He's not going to kill the general, though. Again, like in Napoleon, like in the movie Napoleon, the generals did not, shoot at each other, and they didn't allow anyone else to shoot at them. Turns out the owl, who he's not easily intimidated here, so he's saying, "I'm coming back with a vengeance." Then we go back. We see Spider-Man. Spider-Man is on the east side of town. He's on the east side of town because that's where Debbie lives. Debbie lives. He's spying in on Debbie. Debbie, sadly, kind of at a low point here, where she's having conversations with her stuffed animals. So she's kind of like Eric Cartman with the tea party of his stuffed animals. I mean, and Debbie looks like she's having an intense discussion with the Snoopy doll. Spider-Man is seeing this low point here. So Spider-Man is like, whoa, this chick has hit rock bottom, and I'm looking at it, I'm witnessing it. And he makes a judgment that Debbie has basically lost her mind. And Spider-Man, Peter Parker, he's thinking about the advice that he got from that psychiatrist, the quack psychiatrist, about the kind of the snake pit approach. And he feels that part of the reason that Debbie is going through what she's going through is because he's been kind of a narcissist. And he feels like so many people in his life, like, Uncle Ben, Gwen, Captain Stacy, Aunt May, their lives were made difficult, or their lives ended because, Peter wasn't concentrating. He wasn't focused on people around him, and he was just focused on himself. So again, kind of this interesting psychological look. So what he wants to do is that he realizes he's caused a lot of pain to other people in his past, and he wants to spare Debbie that. And he feels that by following this advice, with kind of like a shock therapy approach, that this would help snap Debbie out. Again, human psychology does not work this way, but we're talking about comics here. And again, there's some really kind of adult, emotional concepts being imparted here. This is one of the things that Bill Mantlo really enjoyed doing. Like if he had read a book that he liked, or there was something he was into, he always somehow found a way of including it in his comic books. So anyway, Spider-Man approaches Debbie. Debbie quite upset that her two-way conversation, because these animals are talking back to Debbie, at least that's how Debbie's perceiving the reality, is being interrupted by Spider-Man. And Spider-Man is declaring that, yes, I am Spider-Man, and I'm Peter Parker. And Debbie approaches Spider-Man, and it's described in a trance, because Debbie isn't sure this is happening. And Debbie is questioning her own sanity, saying that, is this real, or is this one of my fantasies? Spider-Man is assuring her, Peter, that this is real, and that he'll take off the mask. In fact, he'll allow Debbie to take off the mask to prove it. So Debbie, she takes her right hand and she starts to remove Spider-Man's mask. Spider-Man is offering no resistance whatsoever. He's actually encouraging Debbie to do this. And we see Spider-Man's unmasked, and of course, dun dun dun, it's Peter Parker, who we comic book fans know as Peter Parker, but also Debbie Whitman. And this kind of confirms what had leaked out, that that Peter is Spider-Man. Debbie starts, she gets very emotional because this is a big moment in her life. And then Debbie acts very strangely. She turns around. Peter's saying, listen, what's up? And Debbie starts laughing. And basically, she's saying that when you dressed that way, it threw me into such a shock that it woke me up, and it made me realize that whatever made me think that you were Spider-Man, that was completely wrong. Again, human psychology does not work this way. But nevertheless, Debbie is thankful that Peter went to all this trouble to help her out. And Peter's impressed that the shock therapy worked. He gets to keep his identity secret from Debbie, so he doesn't have to worry about her saying anything. However, the scene turns to the Port Authority, and we see a bus that's being boarded, and it looks like Debbie is going to be one of the passengers. Apparently, Debbie has decided to leave New York. She's going to leave Peter, and she's going to sort of tie up the loose ends uh, in her life. For example, the marriage to the abusive husband. I mean, they're separated, but that's also kind of a legal limbo, and I guess she wants to some type of closure with a formal divorce, and to sort of deal with her other demons. So anyway, um, Debbie is talking about maybe I should try, give romance a try again. Peter's saying, listen, I know a guy named Biff, and he's a pretty good guy, and you may want to hear from him. And Debbie says, yeah, I'm going to keep in touch with Biff. And Debbie says, listen, I'll keep in contact with you. And I think from subsequent issues, he really didn't. But nevertheless, they're sort of escorting this character out of the comic book. However, Peter does have a concern, and that's basically the logic of what he did, saying that, hold it, if Debbie thinks about this a little too much, she's going to realize that, holy crap, I was being honest when I told her that I was Spider-Man. Then Spider-Man's, he's swinging around town. He's thinking of Debbie, thinking about how she's like out of his life. Like I said, I never really was too invested in the title during the Whitman years. So I honestly don't know how long she stayed in terms of her as a character. And then we see Peter, he's thinking about maybe he should, get a fresh start and, wake up as tomorrow is, the perfect day. And he's going to rethink some of what he's doing. However, as Peter is kind of contemplating this as Spider-Man on the rooftop, someone calls out to him, and it turns out to be the Black Cat. And we see Peter's very surprised that she's alive. And not only is she alive, but she's actually holding that component that that Dr. Octopus was looking for. Eventually, Dr. Octopus, I probably forgot to mention it. He did end up breaking the device, and then they knew it was a fake. I think that was during the fight with the owl. But I know I forgot to mention that part. So anyway, we see the return of Felicia Harding, the Black Cat. I always liked her character. I think, honestly, romantically, this is probably the healthiest relationship Peter Parker had with a woman, considering his schedule as Spider-Man. And the next Peter Parker I'm going to look at is going to be a Felicia Harding centered one. So anyway, and did I get the letters page? No, there's no letters page with this scan. So anyway, that is my review of Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, issue number, what was it, 74. And I hope to have more reviews up soon. Bye.